Our scripture reading this morning is from Isaiah 60, verses 1 through 6, and I will be reading from the New Revised Standard Version. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. For darkness shall cover the earth, and thick darkness the peoples. But the Lord will arise upon you, and his glory will appear over you. Nations shall come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn. Lift up your eyes and look around. They all gather together. They come to you. Your sons shall come from far away, and your daughters shall be carried on their nurses' arms. Then you shall see and be radiant. Your heart shall thrill and rejoice, because the abundance of the sea shall be brought to you. The wealth of the nations shall come to you. A multitude of camels shall cover you, the young camels of Midian and Ephah. All those from Sheba shall come. They shall bring gold and frankincense, and shall proclaim the praise of the Lord. May God add his blessing to this reading.
Thank you. Okay. I learned not long ago that it's a good idea to read the newspaper before you come to church in the morning, because I can't tell you how many times I've come in and people are like, "Oh, Jesse, are you going to lift this crazy news story that's happened up in prayer this morning?" And I'm like, "What happened? When did this happen?" "Well, this morning. Didn't you read the newspaper?" I don't read the newspaper, but I read news feeds. So I'm glad I did, because this is serious. This is Chico, California, Dateline, Saturday, 1/8/2022. Citizens have chased goats on the loose. Citizens chased them to a liquor store, which seemed to be where they were headed. Update: the runaway goats were located in the area of West Sacramento and Nord Avenue. All goats safely detained and transported in police cruisers. To the animal shelter. Chico Police Department is searching for the owners of the 5 Nigerian dwarf goats. If you know anyone missing their goats, please contact Chico PD. And Chico PD, if you're listening, if you can't find anybody who'll take those goats, I will. Careful what you wish for. So I've been told. Oh my gosh. So yeah, I'm glad I read the news before church now. There is a stereotype that's been going on for a long time. I don't know how long, but somehow all kids are afraid of the dark. And I'm not sure that this is a fair stereotype, because, I know a lot of kids who prefer to sleep at night with a nightlight, and that's okay. But I also know plenty of kids who prefer the dark in order to sleep too. I mean, my young middle child, Cameron, it had to be dark for him to go to sleep. So I think that's kind of a unfair stereotype. And I think there's maybe some parents out there who want their kids to at least have a healthy respect for the dark, especially when they have kids that tend to get up and wander around at night. And so maybe that's why some parents tell their kids ghost stories, or plant ideas in their head that maybe there are monsters that might be living under the bed that will tickle your toes if you put them on the floor. Thank God I did not have that. Because I think sometimes those are generational things. Well, because Grandpa used to say that, and parents, and it goes down the chain, that somehow that's a good thing to keep your kids in the bed. And thank you very much, my mom and dad, for not doing that, because I came up with my own monsters with my own crazy fertile imagination all by myself. My imagination, oh my word. Here's the deal, though. This didn't last very long. This preferring dark to sleep, because that's one of my things. It's got to be dark for me to sleep. But this has changed lately, and I don't know about it anymore, because you all have heard me tell stories about how my wife sets traps for me in the middle of the night. There's one, I don't know how many years ago, so I told a story about a yoga ball and bouncing around on the yoga ball in the middle of the night. I've become very savvy, though, to the traps that she sets. And I dismantle all those traps before I come to bed. And I feel safe because I remember to do that. But the problem is, our big old dog Ninja, our old dog Ninja, has gotten in on the game. He now plays this nighttime game. He's out to get everyone in the house. It's not just me. He is out to get everyone. He will sneak around in the dark like a ninja, like he is, and he will strategically position himself in a way that becomes a tripping hazard so that anybody who inevitably steps on him and trips over him gets a horrific yark. Oh, it's and because he's mostly black, you don't see him. In fact, he could be in the middle of the day and he's just hiding in the shadows, and you step on him and he lets out that yark. Now everybody in the house is a little nervous about walking around in the dark, but it's not the dark we fear, it's what's in the dark that could trip us up, is what the issue is. So, light and dark, powerful symbols throughout history in almost any language and any culture. We have lots of saying that make use of these symbols. We'll say things like, oh, we're living in dark times, or we'll say things like, we don't like being kept in the dark. Or another example is we say that people who struggle with depression are experiencing a dark night of the soul. But then on the flip side of that, we talk about things that were once hidden that are now brought into light. Or maybe after a time of doubt and confusion, you have one of those moments where you suddenly say, and the lights went on for me. And in Buddhism, the moment of conversion is called enlightenment. And in Christian traditions, especially in Eastern Orthodox traditions, they'll call that moment of conversion an illumination. So, you don't need an explanation for any of these symbols because they are somehow in us since birth. They're in the human psyche. And maybe there is some credibility to that stereotype about kids being afraid of the dark. But have you ever heard of a child being afraid of the light? I know some adults who've been involved in some pretty shady business deals who don't like the light, but that's a metaphorical light, right? That's the light of truth, like we talked about last week. The fact that we can move back and forth so easily between the literal meaning of the word light and the metaphorical meaning almost without noticing shows how naturally these symbols work for us. So today we are celebrating Epiphany, which technically happened on Thursday, but because we don't have a special service on the day of Epiphany like some churches do, we celebrate it the Sunday after. So this is why we still have our star banners up. This is still why we have, and notice there's no shepherds here, right? We just have the wise men. The wise men are here in our creche on the table. It's a moment where we celebrate when the lights go on for us. The enlightenment, the illumination that we experience when we know Jesus. So last week I was telling you how we tend to ignore the wise men from the East on the years that we use Luke's gospel for Christmas, but we make up for it on Epiphany because part of the Epiphany is remembering the bright star that shined through the darkness of the night and led who knows how many wise men. We symbolize it by the gifts that they brought. They brought wise men to the East to lead to Jesus. And the passage that Kathy read was the prophecy from Isaiah that kind of gives us some context to the story of the wise men's visit to Jesus. Now, the point of Isaiah's prophecy and Matthew's story is to show how the light of God, previously made known only to Israel, is now for Gentiles, which simply means those who are not born or descended from Israel. So when you read this prophecy from Isaiah, you can see where Matthew makes this connection to the Isaiah passage through the image of these gifts that the wise men brought to Jesus, because gold and frankincense and myrrh represented these exotic gifts from Gentile nations that are far, far away. But for we who are gathered here today, in our time and in our place, the idea of the God of Israel is now the God of everyone isn't really a new idea. It's not a shocking new revelation. In fact, if we're honest, we kind of take it for granted, especially since we too are Gentiles. So then the question becomes, what does Epiphany mean now for us? That's not some startling revelation that God it shines a light for all to see. What do we do with that? Is there anything still new about being brought into the light, or is it all just something in the distant past? Well, here's something to think about as we consider this passage from Isaiah and how it relates to the story of the wise men, because the real issue wasn't just about who God accepts and welcomes. The issue here has to do with God's character. Who does God welcome? How does God operate? What are the ways and means by which God deals with the world and all of the world's peoples? And when the answers to these questions come to light, they still take us by surprise and leave us wondering and struggling about how we're supposed to live like this. How do we put these things into practice now? Well, the first thing to consider is this image of God drawing the Gentiles into the light. Okay? It means that God is not all about dividing us up into insiders and outsiders. God does not divide us up into clean and unclean, acceptable and unacceptable. Might think that this is yesterday's news, that when we talk about God's relationship to the Gentiles 2,000 years ago, but we struggle with this in so many ways when we bring it up to today, because it is a fundamental human condition to think in divisive categories. Because no sooner do we let go of that old animosity when all of a sudden our darkness mutates and then turns us against some other kind of group. So it may not be Gentiles anymore, but it might be black people, or it might be Asians, or it might be women, or refugees, or LGBTQ folks, or Muslims. And again, we divide ourselves up into us and them, us being okay so long as we protect ourselves against them, because they are a threat to everything that we hold dear. After all, they are the source of all that's evil and all that's corrupt, or at least that's what we think. But God will have none of this. Think about this. In Matthew's gospel, the first people to recognize Jesus for who he really was were pagan astrologers from the vicinity of modern-day Iraq. Hey, I didn't write the book. I'm just telling you what's in it, right? When you see the story of the wise men in this light, you know that God is not going to respect any of our categories of who does or does not belong. Whenever the darkness of our prejudice and divisiveness settles in, the light of God's love shines through, and we have to either welcome it and embrace it, or we just go scuttling off into the darkness of our own ignorance, right? Second way in which new things are being brought into light is this never-ending surprise of the humility and vulnerability of the ways and means by which God operates. We keep wanting and expecting God to act in big, powerful ways that no opposition on earth can resist. Even when we try to find words to define God, we come up with words like omnipotent and almighty and things like that. We want a God who deals with evil with an iron fist, unless it's our evil he's dealing with, right? We want a God who wipes away the oppressors and deals out justice for all. And this, of course, links us back to my previous point, because when we think like this, we are, again, dividing the world up into good guys, us, and bad guys, them, and expecting God to endorse our divisions and appoint us as the iron fist of the world. So think about this for a sec. Even the wise men were not expecting what they got. They were expecting to see a vision of power and wealth and influence when they went looking for the Christ child. In fact, who did they go see first? They would see Herod, exactly, to Herod's palace, because that's where kings are born, right? It made sense. That's where rulers are born. That's where God would appear, right? But God turned their expectations around, and he brought a surprising truth to light. And God has done this throughout the Scriptures, because we expect an avenging warrior God, but we instead get a vulnerable refugee baby. We expect a palace, but we get a village. We get a manger. We expect the religiously orthodox to recognize and honor his arrival, but instead we see outsiders and nobodies. We expect this mighty triumph, but instead we get someone who was crucified as a criminal. Arise, shine, for your light has come. This epiphany goes on and on and on. We are continually surprised and even disturbed as God's ways and means are brought to light. Over and over and over, we look for one thing, but then we end up getting another. In Jesus, who was hunted at birth, humiliated at death, God's ways and means are brought into the light. Love and mercy and relief seemed like a welcome idea when God was dealing with us. But when God's dealing with them, we wanted a God of judgment and vengeance and righteous anger. But as the light comes and makes known to us the God who is, we are called to respond. Arise, shine, for your light has come. As we are drawn to the light, and as we kneel before this epiphany of God's vulnerable love and grace, we are called to arise and shine, to shine forth in the revelation in our own lives. Having received the gift as an epiphany, we are called to be an epiphany. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you.